You're listening to the Vendor's Daughter podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Calderon, also known as the Vendor's Daughter. I started this podcast about 7 years into working at my family's business. At the time, and really ever since, I've been geeking out on two main topics: self-improvement and business growth and development. I firmly believe that the healthier we are, both mentally and physically, the better we show up for ourselves, our lives, and our businesses. So, on the show, we talk a lot about things like a positive mindset, why what you eat matters, why it's important to move your body, and how a gratitude practice can change your life. And because growing a business is my favorite topic ever, we also interview entrepreneurs from various fields so that they can share how they grew their business. Which means along the way, we'll also talk about things like email list, growing an Instagram, and knowing when it's time to hire your next employee. You guys, the only thing I might like to talk about more than business is coffee. I love coffee. So grab a fresh cup and listen in as we deep dive into all the things. Claudia, thank you so much for being on the show today. For everyone listening and watching, would you mind introducing yourself and a little bit about your company?
Thanks so much for having me. I am Claudia. I am based in Switzerland currently, and I work as a videographer capturing the souls of people, projects, and environment that they're in
Uh,
short.
that's a really good synopsis. I was just telling you how much I love your work, and I want to get into all of that, but I also wanted to kind of back up for everybody and talk about what you were doing before
Yeah,
videography.
absolutely. So I actually finished my studies in hospitality. Funnily enough, I wanted to go into business and thought to myself back in the day, what a fun real case application in hospitality world would be. So that's when my journey started with focusing on people and service in general. I later, after graduating, stepped into the corporate world. So I started working for a Fortune 100 here in Switzerland
Well,
and progressed. I jumped around many different departments trying to figure out what is it that I love, and I ended up working in CX. So I my last corporate job was as a CX head in the company, um, and what I really loved about that area of work was the fact that I was really focusing on people every day. So their needs, their desires, and how do we apply our strategy and marketing and everything to relate with people. Um, I decided to leave corporate about, oh wow, almost, yeah, a year and a half ago. It feels like yesterday, but it's been a year and a half. And I initially started consulting in CX. So that's actually what I was focusing on, and only made the pivot. I mean, I made many, many different pivots in a year and a half. It was so funny. I think my friends are still, for a while, we're trying to figure out what is it exactly that I'm doing because of the amount of pivots that happened in that time. But it ultimately led me to right now, which is actually videography and focusing on videos which put humans at the center of the videos.
gosh, I love that so much. And I think coming out of the last 2 years that we've had, like lots of people can relate to pivoting a lot. So I think that's very relatable in general, but also like especially in these times. So what about videography? Like I'm still like, how did you like make that connection? Like what made you pick up the camera in the first place?
So interestingly enough, it started with the fact that I needed content for myself. So because I was creating my website and then creating my social media, initially I decided to take on a photographer and do it externally. First of all, I did not really see at the time. I underestimated the amount of assets I would need. So with the how fast social media is moving now, I needed a lot of assets, and that is a high investment when you're hiring someone externally. Second part of it was that while I really enjoyed the output that came out, I thought it was a really beautiful pictures and videos. I wasn't really resonating with how I came across with my personality. So the pictures I felt like weren't necessarily showing. They were a really pretty capture of what I physically look like, not necessarily showing my I'm a little weird. And that wasn't necessarily coming across on the videos or photos. So I picked up a camera initially to start doing it for myself. So taking assets for myself. And that led to shooting a video for my friend's birthday. And that somehow extended into me receiving a phone call for someone's wedding, which led to a company. And before I knew it, it's almost like, so some individuals call it pivoting into it. And in my case, it was almost like following happy crumbs. So I
Mm.
just all of a sudden started following, doing more in a day of what was making me happy. And that little crumb trail led me to videography, which in retrospect, I forgot that as a kid, I would pick up a camera a lot. Um, and it's something I let go of when I was a teenager, and I just rediscovered that side of me that I completely forgot about later on in life now.
Gosh, I love that. I love following your like happy crumbs. But then I also looking at your work, I assumed that like this was your background, that this is what you like always wanted to do, and that like your career in CX was just kind of paying the bills. But this sounds like something you've really honed in on like the last year and a half.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's something like, again, happy crumbs. I was following a trail of what was making my heart happy, and as you said, it's been challenging 2 years. So any kind of glimpse of putting a smile back on the face was what I was looking for in that moment. I didn't really realize at the time that it would lead me into a career.
Gosh, that is so cool. That's just like so inspirational. Just like follow what makes you happy and it leads somewhere good. It's so good. Um, you were talking about like not really appreciating or not really fully resonating with the photos that came back, that they showed a pretty side of you, but it wasn't showing like all aspects of you. And on your website, you talk a lot about how like everything has a soul. And when you're doing your projects, you're really putting the people at the center of it. You're putting the soul at the center of it. So how is that different than just like taking a photo, or like how are you getting a different experience for people?
Um, so first thing that comes up for me here is I'll share maybe a quick story because I think it's a good example of that. What I found really interesting on one of the first shoots, I don't necessarily take photos, but it just so happened that one of the first projects I landed, I was asked to also take some headshots of individuals inside of a company. And what I found really interesting is that I would take a series of photos, and then together with the team, we would sit down and look at all the headshots of all the individuals. And the team knew each other really well. What I found really interesting is that the shot that the person would choose would be a completely different shot that the team would cumulatively choose for them. Um, and it's interesting because I think it made me realize that some of the pictures that the team was choosing, it was not necessarily the perfect picture. It was not the way we were kind of setting ourselves up on the picture, but they were choosing the picture where the person had the crinkle around the eyes because they were laughing so hard. And for them, they were saying, oh, this is exactly how that person is in meetings, or this is how we know this person to be. And so I think that's kind of where that difference comes in. And I've noticed this with my pictures as well, is that sometimes I will choose a picture of myself and my family or my friends will come out and say, but this is not exactly you.
Mm,
Um, we can see in your eyes, this is a more staged photo or a staged video. And so to come back to your question, I think what I really enjoy doing is not over scripting.
mm,
And so even when working with companies, what I really try to focus on is replicating the real case scenario. So if we are going to shoot a reunion, so if we want to show a community feel, I would not necessarily ask people to come in and pretend that they haven't seen each other in a long time. I will actually work with the company on setting up a quick coffee with some people who haven't actually seen each other in a long time to come together and just capture that moment. Because when it comes to energy, one thing I personally found is that it's really hard to fake chemistry. Um, and I know that there are actors that are really incredible at doing that, but most of the time when it comes to social media assets, it's individuals like myself, and I'm terrible in front of camera.
You are
Right,
not.
funnily enough, I have a huge red button syndrome, and I start sweating the moment that camera comes on. So if someone asks me to follow a certain process, it's really hard for me to show up authentically on it. What happens most often is that the pictures I really like of myself or videos that someone captures is because maybe my partner was actually sneaking a video of me somewhere when I wasn't paying attention. And so I was showing up as my natural self. So most of the time, we try to really kind of recreate the moment rather than staging it. At least that's what personally works for me really well for that.
That makes so much sense. I also hate being in front of the camera, and so the photos that were taken of me where I didn't know the camera was there, I enjoy those so much more because it's like when I look at a photo of me where I was like posed for it, I can feel my own uncomfortability in that. I'm like, "Oh, I can still feel how unsecure I or insecure I felt," you know? So I like the ones where I had no idea that the camera was rolling. So I totally resonate with that. And for your work, you work with like you run the gamut, right? Like you'll do weddings, you'll do business. I saw one video on your Instagram, it must have been on your Instagram, where you were working with a snack company and it was like start to finish, like someone ordered and then you took them through the boxing
Yeah.
experience. We also have a snack box company, and I was like, that is such a cool video. Like, I would love to replicate something like that, but I'm derailing a little with the conversation. But I was like, well, my warehouse isn't very pretty, and like we would have to like rearrange things to make it look more beautiful, you know. But I like what you're saying. It's like, no, like let's just like capture the way things actually are. So that's kind of nice
Yeah.
to hear.
And if I may add to that, I mean, one thing that I found really interesting. So I was sitting and research a lot when the pandemic hit 2 years ago, and I spent I was actually in Italy when it all started. So
Wow.
I saw the evolution moving really fast. I mean, I was running to the border in time to get back into Switzerland before they shut down Italy. So I was the first person, like I was in that first group of people quarantined in Switzerland before anything even started.
Oh my
So
god.
because of it, I think I started really early. I sat down and I started researching and trying to anticipate what's going to happen in terms of buyers' behavior in general as
Yeah.
a result of this. And this was back in March 2020.
So, like,
And
at the very beginning.
at the very beginning, so and I was watching the progression in other countries. Switzerland was coming quite late, so we were able to observe other countries before it started for us, and all the lockdowns started happening. And one thing that became very interesting in like observing, and I mean, I don't have any scientific proof for this, it was just from pure observation because it was all moving so fast, is if you look at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, um, and the very basic one being like security and kind of safety, etc., and then moving on to self-realization, etc., at the very top, is that I feel like from my observation, we've been living in a world a little bit before 2020 where we
Yeah.
were operating very much in that top level of the pyramid already.
Mm.
It's been kind of, we got comfortable. It was long after
Yes.
2008, etc. And then what happened in 2020 is that everything went back down to the very beginning. Like we started worrying again about our security and safety and all these basic needs. And so what people needed out of companies in that moment was confirmation of how are they dealing with this, how what are they doing for their
Mhm.
employees, and this concern for the reality of the situation. And the evolution of that today, I feel like, is that we moved a little bit more into wanting authenticity. Like it opened up the channels to companies to show um, the reality, because we started companies had to overnight start telling quite openly with what's happening with them, etc. It wasn't this beautiful staged marketing anymore, it was this very real. And I almost feel like we had a sped up shift to start being more open as companies and more transparent. Um, so today, what I've noticed about consumers in general and clients is that I think it started this desire, and especially the younger generation now is leading that as well, more in this transparency of are things really looking and what's authentic for a company, and not necessarily staging like back in the 90s when we were really staging and telling our customers how they're going to be using our product, but more collaborating with them on how do we develop our products and what do they want out of us, and what are we doing behind to supply for them what they're asking of us. And coming back to your comment about showing that on video, I think that's also the beauty of it, is that with video we can show the reality of the behind the scenes, the really curious part about the real, very real people that stand behind these products. There's someone at a desk every day answering customer emails
Yep.
and packing that order and putting that little handwritten note for the people that are doing that. And there's something very relatable with that. And it shows, I think, a lot of care for companies. So me as a customer, and I cannot speak for every customer out there, but I love behind the scenes videos and really seeing, you know, that not perfect warehouse, but that real warehouse of, oh my gosh, that's my order and it's going out there. And there's this really real human who's packed my order and put a lot of love and care into putting on that sticker so that when I open it at home, it's really nice.
Gosh, I love that so much. I feel like I needed to hear that because it's hard, and I don't know, maybe I'm just like in my own way sometimes, or my own worst enemy critic, however you want to say it, but it's like knowing that like we pivoted into a snack box because of the pandemic. We normally just service offices in the Bay Area. And so kind of going into the market and thinking like, oh, well, my box isn't pretty enough, or we're so small compared to these other companies that have already been so big. Even in the midst of the pandemic, I know, I was going to say I think, but I know I was trying to make us look like bigger than we were. I was trying to look like I thought people wanted us to look, instead of just showing up the way that we actually are. And our sales have not been great. So I'm thinking, well, gosh, maybe if I had just shown up as my messy self and stopped trying to pretend to be somebody else, it would have been way less stressful for me, and it would have been a more enjoyable experience for everybody else.
Yeah, I think you're moving on to a really interesting subject as well for me, which is, it's something I've noticed about myself, moving out of corporate is, in corporate, I made up this persona. And I mean, my business in particular is well, I am the business. I'm the
Right.
product person. So it was very interesting that when I first moved out of corporate, I didn't realize this. It took me a while to notice this, but I made up this very corporate persona of how I was showing up to the world. And so if someone was asking me at the time, was I being authentic? I would say 150% sure I was being authentic. I really felt like I was being authentic. I didn't realize that it was this perfect curated version of me that I was showing up in my business world, that I felt what I thought at the time I needed to show up as a however old I was at the time person inside of corporate in order to be taken seriously. And it was
Yep.
very much fueled by fears and imposter syndrome and other things.
All of those
Um,
things.
and so, what was really fascinating that I found, and this was a really nice surprise, is that as I was working through this to break down these walls for me and start figuring out who I really am and what would it look like if I was to show up really truly authentically, what does authentic really mean for me, because I didn't even really realize that I didn't know myself that well. Um, the more I started showing up as the weird, imperfect self, the more my business started growing,
Mm.
actually. And the reason, and I spoke to a couple of clients about this, and they said, you know what I really like is I really like that you were very honest about the fact that you never did a wedding before. Because I was, you know, very, very scared of my first wedding. I said,
I
this is
would
a
be
really big
terrified.
deal. It's we don't get it. I mean, hopefully this is their only wedding ever. And so, I mean, if I don't capture that I do, well, that's it. It's done. That moment's gone forever. I mean, I can't walk up to them and be like, I'm so sorry, I didn't catch that. Would you mind going back to the
Okay.
altar and just get married again, please? So I was very, very honest about it. And that scared me. that concept, after 2 years of, especially, I had this thought when I was in corporate, which wasn't really serving me very well, is that you can't show weakness, and you can't show that you don't know how to do something, or you can't show that. um, so the first time that I came forward, it was very scary, but I didn't realize that that became one of the things that my clients started appreciating, is the transparency. I mean, I was very transparent about, haven't done a wedding. I will do everything to prepare for it. I will give it my 150% and work on overdrive to make sure that it comes off without hesitation. But you know, that's the reality, and somehow that was very freeing. Um, so there is something to do with like finding your authenticity in it, and also value system, and like what is the values that we want to kind of, what serves us, like what values are we catering for and nurturing, and what values are we squashing in the process of,
Mhm.
letting our fears kind of get in the way.
That's so well said. And I love that idea of that if you are serving some values, that by nature you're not serving others or you're silencing others. And also, I was just thinking, like, all of the, to say that it was like freeing to be that transparent, I could see that because there's so much energy. Like, if you were trying to pretend that you had done a wedding before, you would have been putting so much energy into maintaining that facade that even if you were doing like the same type of prep work, it just has a different energy behind it as opposed to being free to explore and like be curious instead of trying to be secretive. I think there's just a very different energy that comes with that. And I'm sure you got a beautiful result from your first wedding.
Well, the
So,
client was happy. That's the most important.
well, kind of in this vein, of being authentic and sharing your true self. A little before we pushed record, we were talking about your new website design, and it's just beautiful and it's fun and quirky, and you share a lot. I feel about you share your personal journey, and but then you also talk about this idea that everything has a soul and how you're trying to capture that. You even have a soul playlist for yourself, which I just thought was absolutely genius. I love music. I think music is just like the best, purest way to connect with people. But how did you decide what was going to go onto your website? Like, what parts of yourself did you like knowingly share that you thought would resonate with clients or customers, I guess?
Yeah, I
Or was
think,
that even a thought process?
right, absolutely. I mean, I think this is the first time in my life I made a combination of, you read on my website that I have a conflict of head and heart a lot.
Yes.
And my head is, I like to call it, where my head is my little logical brain, and I am someone who's very practical and logical as a person in general. And then I have this heart that's very music and spontaneity, and buy a ticket to London tomorrow because why not? It would be a lot of fun. And sometimes these two sides of me fight a lot over things. So
Yes.
my previous websites, and I've had over the last year, because of the amount of pivots, I actually don't even remember, and I will have to sit down one day and count how many websites there were in the process. I think the first websites were very driven by my head and my CX experience. And it was very much about looking at the customer and the customer profile that I was serving, and then figuring out their needs and their pain points, and then making sure that they're really highlighted in the website, etc. So it was very pain point driven, and especially it was mostly for consulting. So it was really about, what is the pain point for the customer, and how could I support them in resolving those pain points for them. This most recent website was the first time I think that I married a little bit more of the head and the heart, and hence the playlist is there, which was very scary for me at the first time, because I said, "Well, people think I'm crazy."
No, I
In the
thought it
first,
was genius.
so what kind of came up is, of course, I mean, again, I did look very much at CX, and who is my customer, and who am I serving, and what are my services, and what do we want to put forward, and what is the why. I mean, people tend to know they want a video, but why do they need the video? Is it because they're trying to preserve a memory, or with it if when it's a wedding. But if it's a video for social media for a company, chances are that there's a business goal behind it. What might that business goal be? And so how do we make sure we put that forward, that the customer, when reading the website, knows that this is not, the video is a um, sorry, I lost the word in English. It's the carrier for them reaching the goal that they're looking out to reach with it. Because if we do a nice video and that people say that's a cool video, well, that's great. But for a business, in the end, that video is an investment into reaching some type of goal. So, what is that goal?
Yeah.
Um, then the hard part was more about, if I think what kind of made me different from other videographers is, of course, the style that I film in, and I have my particular style, and every videographer has their own style. But what's important for me in my business is that we have a lot of fun in it as well. I mean, video for me is something that's a fun experience, and I hope to make it as fun as possible of an experience for my clients as well. Sometimes it almost becomes like a team bonding exercise if we have a whole team involved. And to do that, it became important for me to also share a little bit about myself and make the customer comfortable with me. And
Mm.
the only way that I felt that was possible was to do a little bit of what I'm asking them to do. And since I'm asking them to give me a peek into who they really are on video, especially when we're doing videos where there's one person being the focus, the least I can do on my side is give them a peek into um, who I am, and kind of, meet them at the same space so that they're not alone and kind of bearing their soul in a way. Um, and the last thing to say about that is that one thing that I struggle, I'm someone who's very private in general. So I struggled with, like, where's the line? I mean, of course, there's the line of, um, how far is too far to share about yourself. But the second part is, like, how far am I comfortable without violating my kind of need for privacy?
Mm.
And so I heard a podcast, or on, I think it was Clubhouse, someone said that a really good tool is to set up boundaries for yourself out of the gate, and to tell yourself what are you okay with sharing way in advance of posting anything on social media, etc. And saying, okay, well, I feel really comfortable with talking about this, but these are parts that don't feel comfortable with. And so I kind of set myself an outline on some things. For example, I'm very comfortable talking about my burnout and about my insecurities and about my imposter syndrome. These are things that don't cause anxiety to talk about it, because it's things that I've worked through already. But I feel very private about my family, for example.
Yeah.
And so this is something that I decided very early on that I don't necessarily want to share publicly about, unless my family explicitly says that they would like to be a part of it. Um, so yeah, setting those boundaries and figuring out how far, what doesn't necessarily cause like panic attacks for us to share.
I love that you shared that, because I think especially in social and like behind the scenes with stories, like people feel like they have to share, it's like nothing or everything, and it's like there's so many different degrees within that, and you can, like, we haven't talked about your family at all, and I feel like I've gotten to know you quite well in the last 30 minutes or just from your website, and I think you can very much choose like which parts of you want to share, and not sharing everything doesn't mean that you're being inauthentic. It means you're just choosing to share certain parts of you. And then also what you were saying about like showing, the least you can do is show like a little bit of yourself in exchange, because you're asking your clients to do the same thing. It made me think of those conversations that I hate, when you have decided to be open or a little vulnerable with somebody and they don't meet you in that. Like, I've had friends in the past where when you got together, they asked you very personal questions and I would answer, but then when like I thought we were exchanging and I was waiting for them to answer the same question, it was just like crickets. And it's like, well, that just feels a little gross. I was like, you felt a little taken advantage of in the situation. So I love this idea of like, if you're asking your clients to be vulnerable, then you can also give them a little vulnerability in exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the end, it's about what makes us feel comfortable. I
Yeah.
mean, the goal is not to start doing something that I think it's very tricky to figure out what is it that makes us uncomfortable because we're scared of it, and what is it that makes us uncomfortable because it's actually not something that, because it's a value conflict situation.
Yeah.
And if it comes from a place of, I don't know, some individuals are really private, just they shield their emotions a lot, and it's just because that's comfort zone for them, not because they wouldn't be able to, but just because they don't necessarily like to. I think it's totally fair for them not to share.
Yeah.
And they can find probably other ways to have an experience of sharing without meeting at the same place. So I guess it's just down to like figuring out what is that comfort zone for us where we can be truthful and transparent, etc., without having to kind of violate our inner child in the process, or
And
make them feel unsafe in a weird way. Because some experience, like I said, some experiences I'm very comfortable sharing, and people are sometimes surprised about how comfortable I am sharing them. um, but it's again because I healed, and it's no longer has that emotional impact on me. But then other experiences are still very fresh, and these they're so fresh that by talking about them publicly, I feel like I'm putting a possibility of them being triggered or hurt again.
mm,
So I could share them, like I could challenge myself to share them, but it's also okay not to, because it's a protection mechanism just to allow us to heal it first before we go out and share it, and that's also totally okay, I think.
completely agree. I think it was Brene Brown who said when she was asked like how do you decide um what you'll share and what you won't share, like when it's okay to share. And she said something very similar, that she knows it's okay to share when she's been healed from it. If she's
Mm,
still going through it, if it's something her and her spouse are still going through, then it's an absolutely like, no, I'm not going to bring it up. Not only because it violates that trust that you have with yourself, with your partner, like your inner child, but it also violates the audience a little bit. It's a little uncomfortable, like it's like bringing them into a mess, and people don't typically want, they, I don't know, it's weird because they want to be part of the behind the scenes, but usually like if you're in the thick, like you don't want to be brought into the middle of a couple's fight kind of thing. It's just awkward, like being that third person in the room kind of thing. So I thought that was a good rule of thumb. Like if you're healed from it, if you can bring it up without re-injuring yourself, then it's a good place to start. But gosh, Claudia, I want to talk to you forever, but I want to like respect your time as well. I guess one kind of final question, and maybe this isn't a great place to end, but if anyone is looking to start their own video within their company, do you have any suggestions of a good place to start? Like they've never made a video, there's no video on their website, they've never done video for Instagram. Do you have any recommendations of a good place to start? And then we'll tell them where they can find you too.
absolutely. Honestly, the beauty of Instagram and TikTok these days is that it's really about quantity over quality sometimes.
I love.
And we're so used to quality, that we can sometimes get in our head and not start with video just because we want to make it perfect.
Mm.
And I think, again, going back to like authenticity and transparency and everything, I think the easiest place is just to start, and try things out. Like, experiment. Again, these platforms are so much about experimentation, and it's very easy to pick up what works well for our, what creates engagement, what creates resonance with people. So trying out small videos, even if they're not perfect, even if they're not perfectly lit, and if as long as we're having fun with it, it's going to turn out great. And there's so many individuals now that are coming up on video where they're really we kind of feel like we need to be in the video. And this might be weird coming from me, where like my focus is actually on people, but it's important to say that it's not 100% necessary to be on the video either. There's so many great videos out there that are performing really well which are focused on the product, or even just hands coming in, or people showing how they're doing something, so not necessarily showing their face if someone's uncomfortable with showing their face. There's so many different ways. So I think the best place to start would be to just pick up a trend, go through the TikTok page or the explore page of Instagram. Just choose one trend that feels comfortable. It maybe one, if someone doesn't like showing their face, maybe one that shows a day off, or how do we package our order from above where we see the face and the box, and that's it. And just give it a go to replicate that video for themselves. And then that's a great place to start. And then not worrying too much about it being perfect, etc. What I found really interesting is that more often than not, the videos that I do that are very spontaneous, very on the spot, I just kind of pick up my phone, not even my camera. I pick up my phone, I do something, and then it took me 2 seconds, I post it, and that somehow goes really well. One of those videos, I did a video on TikTok a year ago, a little over a year ago, where I picked up, and there was a gentleman asking, what is the weirdest thing that's normal in your country, but weird everywhere else in the world? And so I just kind of spontaneously grabbed the phone and answered that question and posted it, and woke up the next day to 100,000 views on it,
Oh
and
my
it appeared
God.
in BuzzFeed. I wasn't planning on that video. It was just my response to something about Switzerland that I found interesting. I did not expect it to end up in BuzzFeed the next day. Well,
Wow.
let's say a couple days later. Um, but that was the video that blew up. On the other hand, I had times where I set up the camera and did perfect lighting, and then took 3 hours to edit it, posted it, and it was crickets after. So there's no rule of thumb. So just starting somewhere, and then experimenting, and not worrying too much about it being perfect in any type of way.
Such good advice. I think that fear that kind of feeds perfectionism keeps us from starting a lot. So I love that advice. And for anybody who wants to work with you, you're based in Switzerland, but your website says you are willing to travel. So
Everywhere.
anywhere, I love it. And she specifically wants a coffee in Bali as well. So if that's anyone out there listening, but no, you'll travel anywhere. You do weddings, corporate events for people who are ready to take that next step. Where can they find you?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I don't have the easiest surname in the world, but you can find me at Claudia Chudzik. So that's CHUDZIK.com. And then my Instagram handle is Claudia Chudzik as well. So I shoot me a DM. I answer on Instagram, or send me an email. And I would love to have a coffee and figure out if we can find a way to do magic together.
I love it. Thank you so much. And we'll link to everything in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, which I hope you did, make sure you subscribe so that you never miss what's next. If you really enjoyed it, I'd be super grateful if you could leave a review on iTunes or anywhere that you listen. And if you really enjoyed it, then I'd love if you'd share it with a friend. Last but not least, make sure you're following us on Instagram at The Vendor's Daughter for a behind-the-scenes look at my personal and professional life, and for what I hope is a little bit of daily inspiration as we walk this crazy journey together.